What's up, guys? NASCAR's back. Oh no, I've lost my mask. Now I'm a COVID-idiot. Oh well, I've been canceled on Twitter before. I can come back from it. Anyway, NASCAR is back, and this, I think, without hyperbole, is one of the most important races they have run, at least in the modern era. I would definitely say since around 2001. This had a lot of significance, not just in the world of NASCAR, not just in the world of auto racing, but across the sporting landscape, across the country, and dare I even say it, across the world. It's important that Major League Sports come back. It's important that our world comes back from this global pandemic, even if things are a little bit different for a while. And of course, this race was run under, mostly different circumstances than what we're kind of used to. But that being said, I think on the path to getting back to normal, on the path getting back to where we were, 3 months ago, or I guess you could say 70 days ago. I think 70 days is about 3 months, or it's about 2.5. But on that path, this was a really big first step. And I know there's kind of been a Johnson measuring contest about which sport was back. I mean, NASCAR really, in reality, wasn't even the first racing series that came back. But let's be honest, it's the first major league sport to come back. And I don't want to diminish this accomplishment by NASCAR. I've got to totally give all the credit to them for getting this done, getting it ready to go. Again, with what we know about the virus, it's very difficult to 100% say, hey, this was done completely safe. Maybe we'll know a better answer to that question in 2 weeks. But looking at all of the factors, I think this is a success for NASCAR. I think this was a big success. I mean, we haven't seen the TV ratings yet. Obviously, I'm recording this right after the race. But I have to say, on a personal note, and I know a lot of people probably have already written angry comments down the comment section without even watching the video, but I really did. I was so happy that this happened. And I didn't have a whole lot of hype coming into it. I think I was still in that whole lockdown mindset of where, it seemed like nothing was going to go right, and just races were getting canceled left, right, and center. You start going, oh God, when is racing going to come back? Are the races that are scheduled going to start getting canceled? That first drone shot when they came in the front gate of Darlington and went over the grandstand, I have to say I felt a little emotional, and I think a lot of people felt that way. And so, again, this is a huge win for NASCAR, huge win for the sporting world, and to be honest with you, the race itself was not bad at all. In fact, I think there were a lot of circumstantial things that, NASCAR was kind of forced to do in this race that actually helped improve the product. And I'll definitely be talking about that in this video, because I think it's important to kind of touch on some of that stuff, because a lot of times I think people think that I just criticize NASCAR and I never give any solutions to kind of, where the problems are. Well, I saw some of the solutions be implemented today, or at least some things that maybe could form some solutions to really get NASCAR back into that groove where you kind of feel like it's the classic NASCAR. Because there were a couple times this race where I felt like I was watching classic NASCAR. It felt like a 90s or early 2000s race. And I thought that was really good. I think one of the things that really helped that was the Fox Sports coverage. Again, this is another organization I criticize all of the time, but I have to give them all of the props in the world. I thought Fox's coverage was just about as good as it could be. There wasn't a ton of propaganda. There wasn't a ton of pandering. I mean, obviously, you're going to get some stuff, which is more than acceptable right now. I think you absolutely should be recognizing the first responders that have kind of helped our nation through this pandemic. I think that is fantastic. And they didn't dwell on it so much. They didn't dwell on it. It was like, everybody was aware of the situation. Everybody was aware that there was no fans. They acknowledged it, but they didn't need to feel like they had to point it out every 5-10 minutes. And I think I really should commend Fox for that. And what, a couple of people put it out on Twitter. I don't want to act like this is an original thought of mine, but Fox themselves really did a good job of cutting down the fluff of the coverage. I thought that it felt more like they had focused on the racing in this particular race than they had in a lot of years. Just kind of let Mike Joy and Jeff Gordon call a race for once and have Larry McReynolds really kind of be the third booth man again, like he always should have been. Again, it felt like kind of those glory years of NASCAR on Fox, kind of 2001 to 2004. You just kind of had that same vibe. And again, part of it may be because NASCAR has been away for so long, and just racing in general has been away for so long. But I think more or less, this was an incredibly positive thing for all involved. And I think the thing that really kind of sold me immediately, and it kind of shows you the power of what television can do when it's done right, particularly racing coverage. They brought back they've already obviously brought back the old NASCAR on Fox theme, but they actually did like a cool intro, NASCAR on Fox did. And I'm going to play that for you because it was so awesome, so nostalgic. And again, a good TV intro can really set the tone for the race you're about to watch. And it didn't have, some, B-list country singer singing some goofy song. It felt like you were about to watch a race. And one of the other reasons that this felt so much like a kind of old school NASCAR race was that this was an unpredictable sporting event. For the first time in what I feel like forever, oftentimes when you tune into a NASCAR race, you have the two or three guys that qualify in, the first two or three rows, and you usually have, Harvick and Kyle Busch and Martin Truex that kind of establish themselves as the leaders, and they run away from the field. That didn't really happen all that much. You had some guys that looked like they were establishing themselves up at the front, and then they ran into trouble. And again, it really did have that vibe of the old school NASCAR, where a lot of times you'd see guys qualify really well, and they'd crash, or they'd spin out, or they'd blow up, and other cars would come back. I guess the comers and goers thing. Again, really enjoyed that aspect of this race. It kept it engaging, where oftentimes, modern NASCAR races aren't all that engaging before the final stage. It almost feels like a lot of times you have drivers riding around, waiting for that final stage, because that's when the race really starts to matter. And of course, part of that was to do with the lack of practice, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But first, I want to talk about the highlights of the race. So, lap one, it didn't take them very long to wreck. I think that was kind of a very predictable aspect of an unpredictable race, and it was also pretty predictable that the guy who wrecked was Ricky Stenhouse Jr., kind of living up to the stereotype. But what wasn't as predictable was not only Jimmie Johnson driving straight to the front in his Ally Chevrolet, but unfortunately, right before the end of stage one, Jimmie Johnson made contact with a lap car, spun out, caught the inside wall, and he wasn't the only Hendrick Motorsports driver to have trouble. William Byron also crashing on his own at the Darlington Raceway. And then we saw some interesting stuff going on with the signage on the racetrack. It looked like the Blue Emu sign decided to rage quit and leave the race early, and unfortunately that kind of screwed over Denny Hamlin getting some signage on the front of his grill. Kevin Harvick pretty much dominated this race, though again, didn't mean it was a bad race, and gets his 50th career win. And this is a kind of a watershed moment for NASCAR, and it's kind of funny that Kevin Harvick is the guy kind of at the head of it once again. Because, of course, Kevin Harvick was, kind of at the forefront of another kind of milestone win in NASCAR history. And I hate to invoke Dale, I hate to invoke 2001, but again, I don't think there's ever been a more apt comparison, because I think in a lot of ways, everybody's dealing with a crisis. And once again, NASCAR is kind of coming through that at first, especially. And with Kevin Harvick winning that, I just immediately thought of the 2001 Atlanta race, where he was driving Dale Earnhardt's car, and I think helped heal a lot of people who were hurt by Dale Earnhardt's crash and obviously subsequent death. And getting that car back into victory lane so early. Now, of course, this race wasn't nearly as exciting as Atlanta 2001. I don't want to paint it, that positively. But again, this race, I think, was extremely helped by the fact that there was absolutely no practice. Now, that's a slippery slope, because I think you also saw on the start where, everyone essentially guessed on their setups. I mean, they're educated guesses. I'm not trying to belittle anybody who works in NASCAR, obviously. They know what they're doing. But you didn't know for sure until you piled off in turn one. And we saw that wreck with Stenhouse. In fact, another, I think the Starcom car almost got turned. It was, of course, it was a bunch of blue and white cars in the middle of the field almost getting turned. So it was kind of hard to, determine exactly which cars were getting turned around. But I felt like that was kind of a predictable outcome. Maybe they could have done 15 minutes of practice. Again, it's kind of hard because, again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not the person advising NASCAR. I don't know what is and isn't kosher when we're talking about, minimizing risk. But I do wonder if the cars and the personnel are all there to begin with, why not do a warm-up? But at the same time, I think NASCAR probably should have learned something from this, that it doesn't seem like they need as much practice as they have anymore, at least at some tracks. Maybe for the Daytona 500, you want to have cars practicing all the time. Talladega is another example. The big fast tracks where, maybe there's a greater risk or danger and you don't want to necessarily be going out there in unproven equipment. At a place like Darlington, maybe you can get away with that, and certainly it seemed like you could get away with that today. It wasn't an unsafe race by any stretch of the imagination. And I think because of the fact that there was that unpredictability factor, the fact that the teams really didn't know what they had, it meant that they couldn't just ride around and sit around, because this was essentially a practice session and a race. And in practice, you want to kind of know what you've got for the end of the race so that you can apply it to the end of the race. And so I thought it made the beginning of the race much more exciting. I mean, one of the things I think, and I didn't really even think about this until today when I saw this race, I saw the lack of practice, and I said, wait a second, how much did the impound rule that was drafted for NASCAR in 2005, or starting with the 2005 season, where cars have to run the same setup they qualify on, meaning you can't practice with a qualifying setup, or if you do a qualifying setup, you've got to run that in the race, and more often than not, qualifying setups are only good for, a couple of laps. So most teams do not run super crazy setups anymore. They don't try them. They just run their race setup the entire weekend, and they have a really good idea of what the car is going to do, what its pace is, before they even get into the race. And you think about 2005, and I think a lot of people would maybe look at around that era as the time where NASCAR racing wasn't quite as unpredictable, wasn't quite as exciting. There wasn't quite as much coming and going, so to speak. And this race, again, kind of felt like the old school NASCAR. And I just kind of wonder if that had a lot to do with the racing that we saw. The teams not having a good baseline, not really understanding everything, kind of taking pot shots at the setup. I think that just helped the racing in a significant way. And I think in a lot of ways it would be a wise idea for NASCAR to take a look at the practice. I won't say get rid of practice completely, but I think if they reduced it, I think maybe you could have a better product. I mean, again, it's pretty clear that the package is not perfect, but I think there's some room for improvement on the overall race weekends. I mean, and less practice would also theoretically save the teams money. It could be a win-win where you get more exciting racing. It costs a little bit less for the teams. Or maybe even with the spec chassis coming in 2022, maybe you could bring back qualifying setups to the league. I don't know. The other thing that really helped this race, I think, significantly was having it at Darlington. It's a classic track. Fans love it. It's got an old surface, which helps a lot. It's not a cookie-cutter track, which, again, is a huge help. And I think in a lot of ways, having the race be a shorter length than kind of the traditional 500 miles, I think that helped as well. I think that's another thing that NASCAR needs to look at, is shorter races. I mean, did you really notice that the race was any shorter? I certainly didn't. I think if they get shorter races, I think they'll be more consumable, probably translate better to a modern audience. I think across the board, I think they'll be a more marketable way to go racing, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you can still have like the crown jewel 500-mile races, but to me, I think having shorter races, maybe less practice, maybe that's the direction NASCAR needs to go, because, again, at least the first half of this race was really unpredictable, really exciting, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Couple more things I want to talk about real quick. I want to give some shout outs to some drivers. Ryan Newman, coming back from grievous injuries suffered at the season opener at Daytona, ran a really good race. I know he had a test day, so maybe he had a little bit of an advantage going in, but quite frankly, just fantastic, especially on no practice, just going back right into a field of 40 cars and driving right up into the top 10 at the beginning of the race. Matt Kenseth replacing Kyle Larson in the 42, got a top 10. I don't think you could expect much more of the 2003 champion. Tyler Reddick was fast all day in the RCR car. Hey, those cars still have speed. And then you look at John Hunter Nemechek, who I think needs all of the praise in the entire world. Getting a Front Row Motorsports Ford into the top 10 at Darlington on no practice, I think that shows a hell of a lot about his driving ability and potential going forward. I bet you in a couple of years a big team will be picking him up because I think if he keeps this style of driving up, I think he's going to be a big prospect. So that was NASCAR's return. That's racing's return. Again, it's a huge moment for sports, huge moment for racing because, again, it seems, again, we'll have to wait 2 weeks, but it seems like this was a success. So this may be the, start of our comeback, of getting back to normal, getting things back to the way we want them to be, going racing, having fun, enjoying life. I enjoyed this race. Glad it was back. Props to NASCAR, props to Fox, props to everyone involved. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts were on the race. Do you think I was off in my analysis, or do you think I was spot on? Let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and I will see you in the next video.